Welcome back to my channel. This video is the episode 2 of this single mother unsolved mystery's disappearance for years, and the discovery made by Hunter left everyone in great disbelief. If you haven't watched the first episode, it's not yet late. Subscribe to my channel to follow up and know how it all started. Spill and Mallory's desperate attempt to destroy the evidence confirmed the existence of a conspiracy. The investigation now had a clear target. But the question remained, who was pulling the strings? Who had the power and the motive to corrupt a seasoned police detective and orchestrate such an elaborate cover-up? The arrest of Detective Jasper Mallory sent shock waves through the department and the local community. The evidence of his corruption was undeniable, but the motivation remained the central question. Fabricating a chemical spill to obstruct a missing persons investigation, particularly one involving an infant, was an extreme measure. It suggested a powerful external influence, someone willing to pay a high price to keep the truth hidden. The investigation focused on the financial audit of Mallory's accounts. The internal affairs investigators, now working with forensic accountants from the state attorney's office, dug deep into Mallory's finances. The audit revealed a series of large cash deposits starting the day after Roisin Kalan disappeared in June 2014. The deposits were irregular, structured to avoid triggering mandatory reporting requirements, and completely inconsistent with Mallory's salary. The total amount exceeded $150,000 over the course of the 2 years since the disappearance. The cash deposits were difficult to trace, but the forensic accountants began the meticulous process of analyzing Mallory's financial activities, looking for connections, patterns, anything that might reveal the source of the money. They tracked the complex money laundering scheme Mallory had used to disguise the funds, channeling the cash through a series of intermediaries, small businesses, and shell accounts. It was a sophisticated operation, suggesting Mallory had assistance in hiding the money. After months of intensive forensic accounting following the trail through a labyrinth of transactions, they finally traced the origin of the funds back to a shell corporation registered in Delaware. The corporation named Osprey Holdings Group had no visible business activities. Its sole purpose seemingly to obscure the flow of money. The investigation then focused on identifying the individuals behind Osprey Holdings Group. The ownership structure was opaque, hidden behind layers of legal firewalls. But the investigators persisted, utilizing subpoenas and court orders to compel the disclosure of the corporate records. The trail led them to a name that resonated with power and influence in South Florida. Orion Vance. Orion Vance was a wealthy, politically connected real estate developer. He was known for his extensive lawn holdings bordering the Everglades, his lavish lifestyle, and his ruthless business practices. He was a major political donor, his influence extending deep into the local government. He was also known for his passion for alligator hunting, often organizing private hunts on his vast properties and within the accessible areas of the Everglades. The connection between Orion Vance and the disappearance of Roisin Kalan was not immediately obvious. Vance moved in circles far removed from Roisin's life as a part-time nurse. But the financial link to Mallory was undeniable. The investigation now had a prime suspect, a powerful adversary who had the resources and the influence to orchestrate the cover-up. But they needed more than just a money trail. They needed evidence linking Vance directly to the crime. Investigators began a discreet probe into Orion Vance and his family, including his son, Cameron Vance, who was 18 at the time of Roisin's disappearance. They analyzed their movements in June 2014, their activities, their connections. But the Vances were insulated by their wealth and influence, their properties were secure, their activities private. The investigation faced a formidable challenge. As the corruption investigation proceeded, focusing intensely on the Vance family, an unrelated breakthrough occurred thousands of miles away, a development that would unexpectedly converge with the Kalin case and break it wide open. It was early 2017. Interpol, in coordination with local authorities in Eastern Europe, conducted a series of coordinated raids on a high-end human trafficking ring operating out of Moldova. The ring specialized in illicit adoptions, procuring infants and young children for wealthy clients around the world. They provided a full service from the acquisition of the child to the creation of fraudulent documents and the transportation across international borders. The raids were the culmination of a long-term investigation into the activities of Gregor Yav, the elusive and ruthless head of the organization. During the raid on Yav's headquarters, a heavily fortified compound, authorities apprehended Yav and seized encrypted servers containing the organization's records, client lists, financial transactions, communication logs. The data was vast, complex, protected by sophisticated encryption. Interpol's cyber-crime unit began the painstaking process of decrypting and analyzing the seized data. It was during this analysis deep within the encrypted files that they discovered a record that immediately drew their attention. The record detailed the smuggling of an American infant from Florida in late June 2014. The infant, described as a male approximately 6 months old, matched the description of Tyran Kalin. The transaction was categorized as a priority extraction commissioned by a high-paying anonymous client. The details of the transportation, the fraudulent documents, and the final destination were meticulously logged. The discovery was immediately flagged and relayed to U.S. authorities. The timing and location were too specific to be a coincidence. The possibility that Tyr and Kalin had been trafficked overseas electrified the investigation in Florida. Detective Ruiz and her team compared the timing of the smuggling operation with the financial data from the Vance investigation. They focused on the shell corporation Osprey Holdings Group controlled by Orion Vance. They discovered a massive wire transfer totaling several hundred $000 from Osprey Holdings Group to an offshore account linked to Gregor Yav's organization. The transfer occurred during the same week the baby was reportedly smuggled from Florida. The convergence of the two investigations was staggering. The connection between Roshin's murder, the corruption of Detective Maliri, and the international human trafficking ring solidified. The evidence painted a chilling picture. Orion Vance had orchestrated the cover-up of Roshin's death and the trafficking of her infant son. The realization that Tyran might still be alive, now 3 years old, living somewhere in Eastern Europe, injected a new, desperate urgency into the investigation. The focus shifted from simply proving the murder to rescuing the child. The investigation now had the evidence needed to confront the perpetrators. The time had come to dismantle the conspiracy and bring the truth to light. The evidence connecting Orion Vance to Roshin Kalin's murder and Tyran Kalin's abduction was overwhelming. The financial trail linking Vance to the corrupt detective Jasper Maliri and the international human trafficker Gregor Yav provided the leverage needed to dismantle the conspiracy. The investigation moved quickly. The priority now the rescue of Tyran. The first target was Detective Maliri. He was already in custody, facing charges of obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and corruption. Now armed with the irrefutable evidence of the bribery, the fabricated chemical spill, and the connection to the human trafficking ring, investigators confronted Maliri with the full weight of the case. They presented him with the Interpol data, the wire transfers, the undeniable proof that his actions had facilitated not just a cover-up, but the trafficking of a child. The interrogation was intense. Maliri, facing the prospect of federal charges related to human trafficking and potentially accessory to murder, realized the extent of his predicament. The years of deception, the weight of his complicity finally broke him. The prosecutors offered him a narrow window for cooperation. Maliri confessed. He admitted that Orion Vance had paid him to fabricate the chemical spill story. The purpose was to keep searchers away from a specific area of the Everglades, a remote access road near the Vance family's extensive land holdings where the crime had occurred. Mallory claimed he didn't know the full details of the crime at the time, only that Vance needed the area secured and the investigation steered away from his family. He provided the details of their arrangement, the communication protocols, the payment schedule. He gave them everything they needed to move against the Vances. Mallory's confession provided the final piece of the puzzle, the direct testimony needed to secure search warrants for the Vance estate. The operation was planned meticulously. The Vance estate was sprawling, a heavily secured compound bordering the Everglades. The risk of confrontation or the destruction of evidence was high. The Vances were wealthy, armed, and desperate. A coordinated, high-stakes SWAT operation was authorized. The target was the arrest of Orion Vance and his son, Cameron Vance, now 21 years old. The operation involved federal agents, state police, and the local SWAT team. At dawn, the operation commenced. A convoy of armored vehicles supported by helicopters overhead descended on the Vance estate. They breached the gates and secured the perimeter, moving rapidly toward the main villa. The silence of the early morning was shattered by the roar of the engines, the chopping of the helicopter blades, and the shouts of the SWAT team. The team assigned to the main villa moved quickly, breaching the entrance with a controlled explosion and fanning out through the opulent rooms. The interior was vast, a maze of corridors and luxurious furnishings. They found Orion Vance in his study, seemingly preparing for his day, oblivious to the impending raid. He was arrested without incident, his demeanor cold, arrogant, and defiant, even as the handcuffs were secured around his wrists. Simultaneously, another team moved to secure Cameron Vance. He was in the guest house, a smaller residence located several hundred yards from the main villa. But as the police vehicles approached, Cameron heard the commotion. He looked out the window, saw the flashing lights and the armored vehicles converging on the estate. Panic seized him. Cameron bolted from the guest house, jumping into a high-powered off-road vehicle parked nearby. He gunned the engine and tore across the expansive property, heading toward the dense wilderness of the Everglades bordering the estate. He knew the terrain intimately, having hunted there since childhood. The chase was immediate, tense. The SWAT team pursued Cameron in their vehicles, the off-road terrain making the chase difficult and dangerous. Cameron drove recklessly, weaving through the trees, attempting to reach the inaccessible areas of the swamp where he believed he could escape. The helicopter monitoring the operation tracked his movements. The thermal imaging camera locked on the heat signature of the vehicle, relaying his position to the pursuing ground teams. The chase spanned several miles of the Vance property, a high-speed pursuit through the rugged landscape. Cameron pushed the vehicle to its limits, but the coordinated effort of the ground teams and the air support was too much. They managed to corner him, cutting off his escape route near a deep canal. Cameron, realizing he was trapped, abandoned the vehicle and attempted to flee on foot, scrambling into the dense undergrowth. He was apprehended after a brief struggle, his face pale with fear, the realization of his situation finally sinking in. With both Orion and Cameron Vance in custody, the investigation focused on the search of the estate. The priority was to locate the evidence of the murder, specifically the freezer used to store Roisin Kalen's body. The estate was vast with multiple buildings, storage facilities, and hunting lodges. The search was meticulous, systematic. Crime scene investigators armed with the knowledge of the freezing evidence focused on areas capable of housing a large freezer. It was in the basement of the main villa that they found it. Concealed behind a false wall in a large storage area was a commercial-grade walk-in freezer. It was the kind used in restaurants or for storing large quantities of game meat. It was running, the temperature inside well below freezing. The freezer was empty, recently cleaned, the surfaces scrubbed spotless, the air inside smelling faintly of bleach. But the forensic teams knew that cleaning a freezer used to store a human body for a year would not erase all traces of evidence. They began the meticulous process of forensic analysis. They used luminol, a chemical that reacts with the iron and hemoglobin, causing it to glow blue in the dark. They sprayed the interior of the freezer. The surfaces glowed faintly, indicating the presence of blood that had been cleaned. But the critical evidence came from the hidden areas, the places where cleaning would be difficult, the microscopic crevices where biological material could accumulate. Investigators focused on the rubber seals around the freezer door, the intricate grooves where fluids could seep and become trapped. They dismantled the drainage system, the pipes where condensation and fluids would collect. The forensic teams collected samples, conducting preliminary tests on site. The results were positive. They found trace evidence of Rasheen Kalen's blood and DNA preserved within the seals and the drainage system of the freezer. The discovery was the final irrefutable proof. The freezer confirmed where Rasheen's body had been stored for a year, linking the Vances directly to the murder and the elaborate cover-up. The chain of evidence was complete. Orion and Cameron Vance were interrogated separately at the Federal Detention Center. The weight of the evidence against them, the financial records linking them to Mallory and YJO. Mallory's confession, the DNA evidence recovered from the freezer was insurmountable. Under the intense pressure of interrogation, Cameron Vance broke down. The fear and guilt suppressed for nearly 3 years finally surfaced. He confessed to his role in the crime, the details spilling out in a torrent of panicked words. Cameron admitted that on June 14, 2014, he was driving his truck on a service access road in the Everglades. He was 18 years old, intoxicated, illegally hunting alligators. He was driving recklessly, speeding down the narrow road when he rounded a bend and struck Rasheen Kalen. The impact was sudden, brutal. Rasheen was thrown to the ground, knocked unconscious, bleeding profusely from a head wound. Cameron stopped the truck, panicking. He saw Rasheen lying on the road, the baby strapped to her chest. Miraculously, Rasheen had shielded Tyran during the fall. The infant was unharmed, crying, but alive. Cameron, drunk and terrified of the consequences, a potential DUI manslaughter charge that would destroy his future, called his father. Orion Vance arrived at the scene quickly. He assessed the situation with cold calculation. He saw his son intoxicated, the injured woman, the crying baby. In a ruthless decision to protect his son and his family's reputation, Orion took control. Instead of calling for help, Orion loaded the unconscious Rasheen and the crying Tyran into his truck. He drove them back to the estate. There, in the secluded basement of the main villa, Orion murdered the injured Rasheen, ensuring her silence. He then placed her body in the commercial-grade walk-in freezer, preserving it while he orchestrated the cover-up. He immediately contacted Detective Mollery, utilizing his influence and promising a substantial payment to fabricate the chemical spill, keeping the search away from the accident site. The baby Tyran presented a different problem. Orion couldn't kill the infant, but he couldn't keep him either. He used his connections in the criminal underworld to contact Gregor Yuzov's organization. He arranged for Tyran to be handed over to the human trafficking ring a few weeks later, paying a substantial fee for the illicit adoption and the guarantee that the child would disappear without a trace. Rashin's body remained in the freezer for a year. When the case went cold and the public attention faded, Orion decided to dispose of the body. He removed it from the freezer, dismembered it to facilitate the disposal, and dumped the parts deep in the Everglades, hoping the scavengers would erase the evidence of his crime. Legal negotiations. He never anticipated that a Burmese python would consume the remains. Authorities located Tyran, now 3 years old. The confessions were detailed, chilling. He was healthy, safe, the crime was not premeditated murder, but a series of calculated, immediately traveled decisions driven by a desperate attempt to protect wealth. The journey was a blur of anxiety and hope. With the confession secured after nearly 3 years of agonizing grief, the focus shifted to the rescue of Tyran grandson. Utilizing the information from the government servers and the Vance's confessions, Era waited in a quiet room, the smuggling route pounding. They identified the adopted social worker walked in holding the hand of a small boy. Unaware of the horrific circumstances of the adoption, the resemblance to Rashi by Yuzov's organization. The years of grief was delicate, the weight of the loss finally lifted. She knelt down, tears streaming down her face, and opened her arms. Orion and Cameron Vance were charged with murder, kidnapping, human trafficking, and obstruction of justice. They both received lengthy prison sentences, their wealth and influence unable to shield them from the consequences of their crimes. Jasper Mollery was convicted for his role in the conspiracy and imprisoned. Era Connolly gained full custody of Tyran, returning to Florida to begin a new life, honoring Rashin's memory by providing Tyran with the love and security his mother had fought so hard to give him.